I've been sitting here for a few minutes trying to think how to intro this book, and I have absolutely nothing. What can I explain? So, today we're going to be talking about Cherish, which is the 6th book in the Crave series by Tracy Wolff. It's a school story, but also it's not, and also it's like fantasy adventure and vampires. But when I say that this series has taken such a turn since that first book where we see just our sweet little human Grace going to a supernatural school, I mean so many turns. In some ways it doesn't even feel like the same story because we've seen so much happen. And this last book was no different. So just generally, if you have never heard of Crave, it's about, I believe she's 17 at the beginning of the story. She lives in California and then loses both of her parents in a tragic accident and ends up going to stay with her uncle who runs a school in Alaska. And it's like a boarding school. And unbeknownst to her, it's filled with supernatural beings, vampires, werewolves, the works. If you're looking for something fun, this is the right series. Normally, when I read a big fantasy series, I need a palate cleanser after, like a little, like a romance or some sort of contemporary something, sort of like take a break. To me, this series has actually been the palate cleanser. Like it's really nice and just kind of light and fluffy. There's a lot of pop culture references, like it's just kind of fun. And so after I've been reading bigger books or been in series and stuff like that, I'll come back and read one of the books of Crave. And that is what happened. I finished this book after reading Sunrise on the Reaping, and I was in an extremely intense book hangover, and I was like, I can't read anything else. And so I'd already started Charm before reading Sunrise on the Reaping, and then I came back to it and I was like, this is kind of what I needed, just something that was a little less intense, I think, while still being fun and adventure-y. And I feel like it's very similar in some ways to like Percy Jackson, you know, where the gods are like a little comical in certain ways, kind of modern-ish. But the series follows Grace's journey as she sort of learns more about the supernatural world and stuff like that. I don't want to give it away if you haven't read it. Again, if you haven't read it, it is your time to exit. Goodbye. Goodbye. So I feel like at the beginning premise for this, I wrote in my notes, we go to save a side character who has been poisoned. And that's the truth. So our whole point, our mission in this book is to go find a cure for the poison for Mackay. And as far as Mackay goes, I was like, you know, I've heard the name, but this is so horrible. I feel like it's heartless to say that I was reading it. I was like, I don't care about that character. Grace cares about the character, which is why it's important. But when we were reading it, I was like, why are we going through all this for a side character that we don't know very well? And I think it partly emphasizes the fact that Grace will go to the ends of the earth for anyone, even someone. She feels that she's very close with Mackay, even though I feel like we didn't get a ton of time with him, at least on the page, for her to feel that strongly. But it is a very gargoyle trait of her to want to take care of anyone. Mackay has shadow poison, and so we have decided we need to go back to the shadow realm, which, reminder, is like the purple upside down of this series that Grace and Hudson were trapped in for a little while when Grace was in the regular world, trapped in her gargoyle form. Do you see what I mean when I say like this series has taken extreme turns? Like that is book 1. Caitlin would have no idea what we're talking about. So we know that the Shadow Queen might know how to fix this problem, and we take Mackay to Lorelei. Now Lorelei is one of the 2 daughters that the mayor had, the mayor who was in the Shadow Realm, and he was trying to save his daughter's life. But because of that, Lorelei's kind of been stuck, is my understanding, and sort of in this half soul, half alive state that leaves her pretty sick all of the time. And since Mackay is not in any type of shape to actually travel with us, we leave him there because ideally, if we can figure out the fix to the shadow poison, we can also, here's the thing, with this magic system I was getting confused. So my understanding is that if we figure out the stuff with the shadow poison, we can also figure out how to free whatever part of Lorelei is trapped in the shadow realm. We can release that too, and she can kind of come back to her full self. Oh yeah, part of this entire process was trying to find Smokey, their pet Umbra that they got in the shadow realm that Hudson has really bonded with. This is his soul dog. And so we want to go back and find her, but I was like, we are not going to go get trapped in the shadow realm for this Umbra. I won't do it. I felt like I was like, are we being serious right now? Because in the last book, we thought that Smokey gave up her life to protect Hudson and Grace from the time dragon because she got scorched by a time dragon. But because it was a time dragon, we're thinking there's a chance that Smokey isn't dead, but maybe somewhere in her baby form. And that is exactly what we find when we get to the Shadow Realm. We find baby Smokey. Grace's human friend has come along on this adventure. I'm glad that Grace and Heather are, like friends again, and we don't have to hide things from Heather anymore. But at the same time, now Grace also, she made this, she's like, Heather, if you come on this mission, this is a mission for supernaturals and you are not supernatural, and I don't know if I can protect you. And I was like, I get that Heather wants to be there for Grace, but if I was in her situation, I'd be like, I might cause more problems than solutions in this particular situation. But Grace decides she's gonna go anyway. And it seems like Heather and Eden might have a thing, but throughout the course of the book, it also kind of felt like Eden and Macy might have had a thing. And so I was kind of confused, and unless I kind of like missed the point at the end of the book, I don't think we got a clear, here's the couple, like which couple ended up together, or if they're still kind of figuring that situation out. But there are vibes throughout the book that Heather and Eden might be a couple. Jaxon and Flint are also fighting, but we're not really talking about it at all. Like the whole book, I was like, can y'all please talk and pull it together, because this is getting frustrating. Now, Grace has talked to Hudson because Grace is in line to become the gargoyle queen. There really isn't another heir, and apparently you can't do both. So, which makes sense. So Hudson is like, I'll just be the gargoyle king. I won't be vampire king, and that will potentially fall to Jaxon, which Jaxon isn't super happy about either. The vampires weren't exactly nice to him growing up either. So it's a weird kind of sticky situation where if Hudson gets what he wants, then Jackson's kind of trapped. And if Jaxon can go free, then Hudson's trapped. But also, if Flint is next in line for the dragon throne, then Jaxon would also be a dragon court representative. And he's also, reminder, got the heart from Flint's mom. She gave him her dragon heart to save his life after he saved Flint's life. And so it kind of makes more sense for Jaxon to be in the dragon court. But Grace feels really guilty about this because she could forego the gargoyle queen throne and be vampire queen, and then Hudson could take care of the vampires. And she felt guilty, and Grace feels guilty about everything, honestly. But I was like, why are we feeling guilty about this? Like, why on earth would Hudson even want to be vampire king? Like, his dad trapped him in that coffin forever. And I can't imagine that the vampire court really holds any good memories for him. But anyway, we decide we're going to the Shadow Realm. That is our number one mission and goal. And so we go to the Shadow Realm, and it's crazy. First of all, nobody remembers Grace. Like, she wasn't there. Every time people talk about that battle with the time dragon, they only remember Hudson being there. And by the way, they renamed the Shadow Realm Attery. They've renamed it to Hudsonville. And at first when I was reading it, I thought it was like Grace making a joke about how everything's all about Hudson. No, they want to be called Hudsonville. It's so funny because they're like walking through the city, and there's all these like collectibles of Hudson and t-shirts of him, and everything's just all about him all the time. And if that wasn't funny enough, Jaxon has to see all of this. And I think that is hilarious. We go into the center of Hudsonville, and there's a massive sculpture of naked Hudson in the middle of the square. And I thought that it was, first of all, everyone is just like, oh, Hudson's just so embarrassed all the time about all of this stuff, because like he didn't expect the people of the town to like worship him and be like following him around when he goes back to visit the Shadow Realm. And it's just like already awkward for him. And then Smokey is so funny. She throws a fit and goes and like chases somebody off of their picnic blanket and then ties it around him. And Jackson's like, that is the skimpiest towel in history. This was really interesting. One thing about Attery is that everything is purple and there was no other color. And so when they go and visit this art co-op, they see people painting with different colors and like using different colors in their art. And to us, that means that there's a smuggler bringing in outside materials into Attery because they can't create anything that isn't that purple color. Hudson thinks it might be the Chupacabra, who we theoretically met in a previous book, but I don't remember him at all. It was so the kids dressed up for Halloween in Attery had me cracking up because they're not only dressed up as Hudson, they're also dressed up as like the rest of the gang because now they've become famous as well now that they're in the Shadow Realm with Hudson. My notes say, when did Jaxon get black hair and skinny jeans? Yeah, I pictured him this whole time as having like a pretty close cropped haircut, blonde, and dressing similarly to Hudson, but maybe just like a little less formal. And so To hear this version of him, I was like, what is going on? And I know that a lot of our crew has kind of changed their style. They've gone through a lot. We see this especially with Macy. She used to be very colorful and playful with her clothing, and now she's very much dark makeup, dark clothing. She's going through a lot, and like Jaxon could be experiencing the same thing, but I just did not picture him with black swoopy hair at all. It was very weird where there were a couple girls dressed like Grace, and because they know that Grace is Hudson's mate, and so they come up and flirt with Hudson, and Grace is right there, and I was like, the nerve on these children, honestly. So we're talking to the Chupacabra, and he doesn't like outwardly say for a really long time that he's part of this smuggling thing. But then he's like, there is a way that like the smugglers are going, and it's through this like water thing, and there is a creature that could eat you. And he's like, it won't eat me, but it could eat you. I haven't seen it, but I've seen people go missing. And I was like, okay, so obviously we're gonna face down this creature. We're sliding down my brain is conjuring a water slide into like a cave situation. That is how I viewed this whole thing. So, and then we're all swimming, and for whatever reason, Grace is like, I'm just gonna paddle around in here for like a hot second. And then everybody's like freaking out, and she turns around and there's a giant anglerfish, like with the light from Finding Nemo, and it's about to eat her. And then Hudson comes and saves her. And I'm like, there are times when we have a really dramatic fight scene, and I'm like, was that wholly necessary? But they make it through, and then the Chupacabra takes them to Kansas, and I was like, it's giving Wizard of Oz. I think what we were doing in this book was trying to visit a lot of places, which I liked. I liked that we moved around a lot. We got to see a lot of the world through the supernatural kids' lens, and I thought that was fun. But I thought we were in Kansas, but then all of a sudden we were going to Greece, and I was a little confused about the jumping around, like where we were ending up, really, I guess. But we think that might be where the bittersweet tree is, which is what we see. This has been my problem with the series as a whole. There's so many different things happening, but when I try to talk to you about it specifically, it's hard to sound like anything ties together because there were so many details, and I feel like I'm jumping around like crazy. But they're going to Greece to try and find the bittersweet tree, which we believe has celestial dew that we can then trade for the shadow poison antidote. That is at least what is in my notes. Like, there were so many different little things that connected that sometimes I feel like I don't fully understand where we were going. But while we're there, we run into a goddess. She is the goddess of recording history. She's called the curator. And she says that the tree that they're looking for, it moves when people are looking for it. And now it's in South America. And I was like, great. Does the tree know, like, as soon as we get to South America, is it going to pop somewhere else? Like, how does the tree know? There was a Hamilton mention. The curator is talking about she goes and she sees, well, she doesn't see, that's the thing. She knows about all of the historic plays and stuff and all the movies that come out and all the music that comes out, and she has all this memorabilia of all of these things. Like, she has a Hamilton playbill, and I thought that was like a fun mention. I do enjoy the pop culture references. It took me a little bit. In book one, when we were talking about One Direction a lot, I was like, it's pulling me out of the story. Because normally, if you make a pop culture reference like that, it automatically dates the book and like kind of almost breaks the fourth wall, if that makes sense. Where you're like, oh, this is like our world. And even though like so many books are like that, it just, normally I don't enjoy that type of thing, because then I'm like, it feels like you're almost putting a pin in the story in time, and it's not going to relate later. But I did like it in these books, and by the time we got to the Hamilton mention, I was like, I love Hamilton. I love Hamilton. And we're trying to talk to this goddess, and we're like, hey, can you tell us where the tree is? And she was like, sure, but I'm so busy, I physically can't tell you the location. I was like, girl, it would take less time for you to tell us where the tree is than for you to go on and on about like how you're too busy to talk about where the tree is. Like, we're not asking you to take us to the tree. We're asking you to just tell us where it is. But she says no. And she's so busy, and it's because she is recording every single thing in history that ever happens ever. We show up to talk to her, like, she's like, come back tomorrow, like, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And then she doesn't show up, and so Grace and the girlies go and check in her personal quarters, which she said not to go to, but they end up going there anyway. And they find her in this control room that is on all sides TVs showing every important thing in history that's happening. And she has to sit in the middle. This is her job as a goddess, is to sit in the middle and record every single important thing that's happening all the time. And apparently the muses will sometimes come in and help her for a couple hours at a time to give her a break, but really she doesn't get any type of vacation ever. And so Grace is like, hey, if we give you a 24-hour break, will you then tell us where the tree is? And she says yes. And I was like, why can we not just like know where the tree is? Just stop recording the history. I was like, we don't need it. I was like, there's a lot of humans doing this job too. Why do we need this? But I guess we needed it for the chaos, because the goddess goes and we see her in one of the screens because Blackpink is performing, and that's where the goddess chooses to go. And I think that's hilarious. And then I also think it's funny that it was like showing up on like the world's most important history. But we're taking over her job, and it is genuinely horrible. We have Eden, Grace, and Heather in this control room trying to do all of it by themselves, and they're so busy to the point they can't even look away for long enough for Grace to text Hudson, Flint, and Jaxon to come help them. They eventually have to come up and find them on their own. They eventually do. And then Flint, he doesn't have like a specific spot where he's sitting, and he's trying to help everybody at the same time. They're already like zoned in trying to catch all these things, and then you have somebody saying like things you maybe did or didn't see in your ear, and I'm like, Flint, this is not helping. And then Jaxon gets frustrated by it because Flint has this thing where he's like, Jaxon wants to do everything by himself. I do like that Flint and Grace have this conversation where they're like, oh, our Vega boys, like they are the only ones who can ever do anything. They're the only ones who can be self-sacrificing. Like it's always on them all the time, because that's how the boys view it. But it was just like, it was really frustrating because I was like, these two have been at each other's throats for like a book and a half now. Grace and Hudson finally get a break, and we kind of see the emotional toll of recording history in that way. And Grace really does make a point to mention like some of it's beautiful, some of it's amazing, and some of it makes you lose all faith in humanity. This is how it feels to scroll through social media sometimes. But then while Hudson's asleep, he has a really bad dream, and Grace knows that Hudson isn't telling her something, and she doesn't want to push him. She's like, that's not our relationship. But it got really frustrating about the midpoint of this book, where I was like, y'all talk about how you tell each other everything. That's such a big part of your relationship, and yet Hudson has this big thing that he's not revealing to you, and I didn't understand. The goddess comes back. She's nice again because she had a vacation, and she tells them where the tree is. And then all of a sudden, Remy shows up. Remy, who we met in that prison in book 4, I think. He kind of has like a future telling type of power to him, and so he knew that they were going to need his help, and so he makes a portal to South Africa for all of them to go find the tree and extract the dew from the tree to trade for the poison, and this theoretically is going to fix all of our problems. We get there though, and Jaxon is trying to get some of it because we think the dew, there's like honey coming off the tree, there's like honeycombs off of it, and everyone's like, is it really that easy? And of course it's not. Nothing ever is, especially for this crew. And so Jaxon is trying to get some of the honey, but I guess it like makes contact with his skin or something, and so it's like slowing him down, and he's trying to help, but he's also like now in slow-mo, which is creepy because then Jaxon tries to transform into his dragon self, and because the transformation is so slow, it's like watching a really creepy monster thing. But because we're trying to steal the honey, a bunch of the bees attack us from this tree. The only option is for Hudson to like Thanos them out, and as soon as he does that, he realizes that all those bees had souls, and so he's like fetal position, rack like his brain, he can't. And then on top of that, we have a bear to deal with who is a soul eater, and so he is also attacking all of us. Heather can't do anything because she's human. I was very frustrated a little bit with that whole situation. I was like, why is Heather here? Obviously she does help us out, she helps later and stuff like that, but it just seemed like such a liability because Eden has to take her up to keep her out of the way, and then Grace is sort of on her own because since she can turn to stone, she's kind of like impervious to the honey and stuff like that, and so she's getting attacked by the bear while trying to protect Flint, Jaxon, and Hudson, who all appear to maybe be dead from the bees. And then we're fighting the bear, and then we get knocked out by the bear. We wake up, and there's a horrifying moment when Grace is like, I'm not a gargoyle anymore. Turns out she was just kind of a little disconnected. It takes her like a minute to find all of her like strings inside herself, like all the strings that connect her to her power and other people and stuff like that. But I was like, why did you scare me like that? Everyone looks dead. We genuinely think that Hudson's dead for a second, and I was like, look at what we did. All this for Makai, a side character I don't care about. Our whole crew, like so many people put their lives at risk, and I feel like the payoff maybe wasn't strong enough. And I feel like for me, I didn't care about Makai strongly enough to feel like it warranted this amount of sacrifice, especially if one of our inner circle members was going to die from this. Luckily, the mating bond is still there. Yay, Hudson is alive, but we're struggling to get up, and it's almost like Grace is almost dead because like the flowers start to like absorb her. And I was like, are we self-burying? Like, what is going on right now? And we got to get out of there fast. Luckily, Remy shows back up, and he is able to portal us, but it's like an emergency portal, and you know, like with the portals, they can only really go somewhere that they know well, which means we land back in prison because that's where Remy was born. I'm so tired of this prison. I thought it was really funny when Grace is like freaking out. She's like, Hudson, I thought I lost you. And he was like, you were yelling a lot, weren't you? Because he could hear her but couldn't respond. And I thought that was funny. Like, I do really like their banter throughout the course of the book. I feel like you can tell how close they've become and sort of how well they understand each other. And I really did like those little quips between Grace and Hudson throughout the story. So this is when the crone shows up, because the crone is in charge of the prison right now. It hasn't been that long, but I feel like it's been too long since I've read the last book, because I remember having a hard time connecting all the dots anyway previously. So now when I was reading it, I was like actually really struggling. If I mess anything up or the connections don't make sense, please let me know how you understood it in the comments, because there were times where I was like, I actually feel like a little lost right now. But the crone shows up. She cures them from all of their injuries because she thinks it's gross that they're all bleeding and unwell from their fight with the bear. And then she says that she needs their help with something, and she invokes her favor, because remember, we got a tattoo from her a while back because Grace promised her a favor. And then she's like, Grace, give me that elixir that you got from the tree. The honey that we just almost died for, that's what she wants. That was our only bargaining chip for Makai's life, because she thinks that taking this honey is going to separate her from her sister. And then the crone, just because she's mean, decides that she's gonna throw them in that prison forever. You know, like the chamber room there where everybody gets stuck in their nightmares. And so she does that, and anyone who's full supernatural, so Hudson, Jaxon, and Macy, they end up going into the chamber. And if you were in that chamber, it's already bad enough to be in there for a couple nights, like she was dealing with Hudson in the prison previously, but to be locked in there forever, they would just eventually scream until they died, I think. The only way we rectify this problem is Grace is able to funnel power into Remy, who is able to kind of he's trying to control it. It's a really hard time because Grace's magic, because she's a gargoyle, is part chaos. That's how I read it. And so she's giving that chaotic power to Remy, who's trying to control it, but he kind of can't. And then Heather puts her hand on them, and I was like, when did Heather get magic? But apparently it's just the magic of being a human, because humans are also able to create and do amazing things. And I was like, okay, I guess I get it. For a second I was like, there's no way Heather just randomly became a supernatural. So Remy is able to direct this power to break down the prison. And then at this moment, we're like, oh, well, we're out of prison, but we still don't have what we need for Makai. And then Grace is like, oh, wait, there's an extra vial of the honey that I forgot. How'd you forget you had that? We go back and we see Makai and Lorelai together, and they appear to be a couple. And I was like, I thought Makai was unconscious the whole time. How did they ever talk long enough to become a couple? I guess maybe he was coming in and out, and later we learned that they were mates. Maybe that was all they needed. They didn't have to spend a lot of time together. But then they go back to the Shadow Queen. So my understanding was that we bring the honey to the Shadow Queen. The Shadow Queen then gives us the antidote to the poison for Makai. But then Grace shows up and she's like, we failed. And I was like, but why do we have the honey then? If you understood what happened at that point, please let me know, because I don't know why I don't get it. Maybe I wasn't reading closely enough or something, or maybe it was because I started the book a month or two ago and then now I'm just finishing it. Maybe there's something that's not connecting. But I was so confused at this moment, because I was like, we got the honey though. Why don't we get the shadow poison antidote? We find out though that the crone hasn't trapped the Shadow Queen in this shadow realm. The bloodletter did. And I was like, our grandmother? What? Grace's grandma trapped the Shadow Queen in the shadow realm. And I was like, why? And then we find out the Shadow Queen made a deal with the crone. The crone gave the poison to the gargoyles. And because of that, the poison killed the bloodletter's daughter. Is that Grace's mom? No. It had to be somebody else. That doesn't make sense. I actually don't know. But anyway, because of that, the bloodletter took revenge by putting the Shadow Queen in the shadow realm. And the bloodletter used chaos because she is part gargoyle, even though she's also vampire. Hold on. Now I'm trying to explain it. You know, sometimes you think you understand something until you try and teach it or something. And that is how I feel about this. I felt like I understood what was going on in the story until I'm trying to actually say it out loud to you now. We're just going to go with it. The bloodletter has used chaos magic to build this shadow realm and the prison fortress thing that the Shadow Queen lives in with Lorelai. And then Grace is like, hold on, I also have chaos magic, so maybe I can undo this whole situation. And so she is trying to take it down, and then she realizes that there's also time magic, which would make sense because of the time dragons, and it's from that time god who is so annoying this whole series. And so she's like, but because I'm a demigod, I also have some time power. And so she's able to start breaking down these walls. And then Smokey remembers. She had last time she was in the Shadow Realm, this is why people don't remember her. She got hit with like a time arrow that pulled her out of the timeline. And so now she's like, the arrow is still inside me. And I think what is meant with that is like, it's supposed to symbolize, grudges and anger and things that create shadows within ourselves, is my understanding. And that is kind of why she forgot the Shadow Realm as well. And so now she's like, now I have to let go of the past to let the arrow go. And so she does that. And then the Shadow Realm cracks and color starts to come in. And like, it's just a little confusing because I really did think that the Shadow Realm was almost entirely a figment of Grace's imagination. But I guess it's more like the fairyland in Mortal Instruments, where it's like a different place and just time moves really differently there. Then Grace is like, oh no, like this Shadow Realm is collapsing. I know that some of the people who live here still want to live here. And so she uses her magic to make this big forest thing to keep it from the rest of the world. And I'm like, okay, so maybe now that the Shadow Realm isn't a prison, it's just part of the rest of the world. But now we have this little section here that's safe. This is when Mikhail drops to his knees and is dying, but the Shadow Queen can't save him. I was like, okay, so then what is the antidote to the shadow poison? Because if the Shadow Queen can't do it, who can? At this point, Mikhail is being very chill about dying. He's like, it's just my time, guys. And I was like, you're being really relaxed about this whole situation, especially when Lorelai is sobbing over him. This is when Liana, so this is one of the mayor's daughters, because Liana and Lorelai are the mayor's daughters and the Shadow Queen is their mom, is my understanding. The mayor's not there anymore, but And so Liana comes running out, and she's been healthy this whole time because Lorelai has been sick in the Shadow Realm. And so she comes and she's like, you can have your full soul now, yay. And then as soon as like the soul hits Lorelai, she's like, oh my gosh, Mikhail's my mate. And then she's like, because poison that is in Mikhail can't actually hurt her, we're gonna try to go through the mating bond and pull the poison out. Very Twilight. And so we do that, and Mikhail comes back from the dead, like very Sleeping Beauty style. And then everything seems fine, and we're gonna go back to our regular world. But Smokey can't come because she's an Umbra. She's part of this shadow world situation. And so we have to leave her there. But we can come visit her at any time. And then we're heading into the coronation. And I was like, is it a coronation or like a ceremony? Because it sounds like this is going to be a simultaneous thing where Grace and Hudson get crowned leaders of the Gargoyle realm, but then they're also going to be promoted to the head of the circle, which is, like all of the main people from the different forts ruling together. She has this amazing dress. The description, I was like, this dress is so beautiful. And then instead of Louboutin heels, which she had access to, by the way, had access to bejeweled Louboutins, and she decides to wear hot pink flats instead. And I was like, I cannot with this girl. Like it's very sweet because she and Macy have like this joke about like hot pink because Grace didn't like the hot pink comforter when she moved. She couldn't tell Macy. She felt so bad about it. But I was like, no, put on the heels. You're about to become queen. Right before they're about to go out, she offers to Hudson, she's like, last chance, if you want to be the vampire king, I will be vampire queen because I want to do what's best for both of us. Because Grace is very sweet, but Hudson's like, no, we don't need to do that. They go out to like do their coronation thing, and I thought it was really funny because there's like bejeweled thrones, and it was super cute because Grace is like, that's not really up my alley, but it is up Hudson's, because Hudson loves, everything extravagant. And I thought that was like a cute little note. And then we're still not sure who's going to lead the vampire court. I was like, why not Jaxon and Hudson's sister? Did something happen to her? Because I thought she was fine. And so she could just be vampire queen. But before we can even start the coronation ceremony, the crone comes through with her hunters. And I just wrote in all caps, we can't have one nice thing. We truly can't. We can't have a single good experience without there being a battle in the middle. We put it down fairly quickly though, and then the blood letter says that Grace can choose what to do with the crone. Grace is like, I could drain the crone of all of her power, but the crone represents order. And since she and the blood letter are chaos, we need to have that balance in the world. So she doesn't do that. And then I just don't understand what happened here. The blood letter takes the honey. Why? I'm sure there was a reason that I missed, but if anybody could fill me in, I would really appreciate it, because I didn't know why she did that. I guess it helps to like restore like the order and balance type of thing. Then Makai shows up and he's like, actually, now that I'm all healed up, turns out I have a little bit of shadow power that lets me keep Smokey in the real world. So we get our dog. epilogue. We all party. Grace has a lot of like really nice like ending thoughts. I did enjoy kind of the wrap up. I feel like Grace kind of comes to this full understanding of like we don't want to repeat the same mistakes of the past and stuff. And so she and Hudson sort of lead the circle into opening it up to a different style of governing where, you know, more people have a say and stuff like that. And I thought it was a nice conclusion, and it takes the pressure off of Grace, because that was one thing she was really struggling with in this book, was she was like, I don't even have time to paint. I don't have time to be myself anymore. And now, because she's trying to spread out the burden of leadership among more people, I thought that was a really nice conclusion to her story. And then we also find out that Hudson is going to be opening a school, sort of like Cadmere, but just like more people can get into it, more supernaturals and stuff like that. And so I thought that was a really nice tie-in, because, you know, when he was in the Shadow Realm, he was a teacher, and it seemed like he really enjoyed that. And so this was like a cute little like callback to that, while also kind of doing a nod at the future of what type of society Grace is trying to usher in for the supernaturals. And so I thought that was nice as well. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed the series. I think there were times when I just like didn't fully connect what was happening with the magic system. And I don't think that's on the writing. I do think it's on me, because like with this one, I took a break kind of in the middle of reading, and I feel like maybe I just didn't take good enough notes for when I came back and I was like, why is this connecting? Why is this working? That was more of a frustration towards myself while I was reading, but overall I really like this series. And to me, it gives a lot of similar to sort of Twilight vibes in the way that it's like normal girl, normal world, but there just happens to be supernaturals in it. And it's kind of a secret. It gives that vibe. Everybody loves a school story. This one definitely went off the rails in its own way, but I did really like it. I don't think I've ever read anything with like gargoyles in it like this before, so that was really fun. I would love to hear your thoughts. First, if you understand stuff about the magic system that I did not, I would love to hear your thoughts and explanations. Second, what was your favorite part? I feel like my favorite part of this was actually the TV scene. It gave me a lot of stress when we were like trying to record all of history for the goddess, but like I did enjoy that, because I like stuff like that where it's like you expect gods and goddesses to have all these like old-timey ways and stuff like that, but it's really like they have technology, or they want to go watch Blackpink in concert and stuff like that. In that way, it reminds me a lot of Percy Jackson, and so I really liked that. And I thought Hudsonville, the whole thing was just like so funny. Now that this series is done, I'm hoping to go back to Mistborn for a while. I really need to get to Hero of Ages, so I'm excited about that too. Please like this video if you liked it, click subscribe if you want to talk about more book stuff. My name's Caitlin, thanks for watching. Bye.